My name is Sarah Gibson, and this is Thomas Kotcheff, and together we are HOCKET, Pianosphere's core artists. You just heard the first movement of George Crumb's Celestial Mechanics.
George Crumb is a pioneer of extended piano techniques. Extended techniques being anything that goes beyond playing the piano normally.
One of the most common techniques that we see in this piece is called muting. In order to mute, you take the pad of your finger and you place it on the strings of the note that you are playing towards the brass nut. Here is what a note that is not muted, a note played normally, sounds like. Here's what happens when I mute the strings with the flesh of my finger.
We see this technique used at the beginning of the piece when I first enter.
We also see this a little bit later in the piece in the higher register of the piano.
Another great technique used in this piece is scraping the strings. If you look down here at the low end of the piano, these strings have these ridges in them. You can take your nails and scratch against those ridges to make a really fantastic metallic sound. Here's me doing on one string a scrape. Now in the piece, George Crumb uses it as a cluster with 3 strings simultaneously.
It's interesting to note that this technique really only works in the bass register of the piano. As you get higher into the piano, the strings no longer have ridges. So the friction between your nails and the strings with ridges is now lost, and therefore the technique is nullified. Another way that George Crumb amplifies the sound of the traditional piano is by using harmonics. In order to play a harmonic, you take any string, and if you touch various places on the string, it activates overtones. Here's what a normal middle C sounds like. Now, if I touch one of the overtones, we get a different pitch.
In the low register, here's what a normal low G sounds like. If I touch a harmonic, I can get the B 2 octaves higher.
The final technique used in this piece is called strumming. And strumming is created by simply strumming horizontally across the strings of the piano. Here's what it sounds like in the high register of the piano. And here is the middle register.
And George Crumb in the piece uses it down here in the low register.
Strumming was actually a technique that was first used by the great American experimentalist composer Henry Cowell. And one of his most iconic pieces that uses this technique is called Aeolian Harp. And in this piece, he simply has the pianist strum the strings of the piano as if it were a harp.
Also in that piece is plucking. And using the pad of your finger or your fingernail, you can pluck the string.
When we play this piece, Thomas actually goes to the other side of the piano, and I sit on this side of the keys normally as I silently depress each of the keys, and Thomas does all of the strumming and plucking.
Extended techniques, as opposed to prepared piano, two very different things. Extended techniques is any technique that elicits sound from the piano that doesn't involve the normal depressing of the key to create sound by the hammer striking the string. So it can be anything from tapping on the outside of the instrument to eliciting guiro-like sounds on the key surface, to plucking, strumming, muting, tapping, knocking, bowing on the inside of the instrument. It's the thing that's amazing about extended piano techniques is that it's a genre that's still growing. New sounds are constantly being discovered, which is incredible for an instrument that was invented in the early 18th century. It's not so much that I want to use extended techniques, it's the fact that I've been doing them for so long that they're just part of my vocabulary. So to not use them would be to say, speak to me, but don't use the word and. You know, they're just part of my timbral language and world. So rather than being some kind of extension or add-on to normal piano sound, I just feel that it is part of the piano palette. I wrote SSBRI in response to what was happening in our country at a very, very dark time. And I felt the need to address my concerns and anxiety and sort of horror at what was going on in a musical way. And sometimes, you know, I worked with David Lang a lot, and one thing David taught me about composing is just because something seems like an obvious idea doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. So the first thing that came to my mind was I wanted to take the Star-Spangled Banner and do it upside down backwards. I didn't know what it would sound like, but it was just the first thing I thought of because everything in our country felt upside down and backwards. And so I wrote the melody out, and then I tried playing it backwards and upside down, and it was surprisingly melancholic and dark, and I thought it had some potential, but it couldn't just be by itself. So I wanted to add a particular color to give it this sense of foreboding. And that's where the extended technique comes in. I thought I wanted some kind of low, dark sound, like a black cloud of dust rising out of the earth. And I thought about using just clusters in the low end of the piano, but it was too heavy and too pitched. So instead, I decided to ask Thomas to do these sort of palm timpani pops on the low strings inside the piano. I've always loved that sound. To me, it's one of the most atmospheric, blooming sound timbres that the piano can create. It's just, it's otherworldly. And it's very different than just playing a cluster on the low end. So that's how that came about.
As a composer, you're always looking for different ways to express yourself, and you want to use all of the tools available to you. Not only are you wanting to push the envelope a little bit and push the boundaries of what have been done previously before you, but you also want to use all those tools to express ways that you feel and the things that you're hearing. And so the world is always changing. It's so much different than it was 50, 100 years ago, that you want to reflect the world as you see it now and your perspective on it. And so extended techniques are a way to make that possible. I composed Final Thoughts last summer at the height of the Black Lives Matter movement. And in light of everything that was going on, more and more cases were coming to light and getting national attention. And one that really caught my eye was the killing of Elijah McClain in 2019. Elijah McClain was 23 years old, African-American, that was killed by law enforcement. And the more I looked at this story and watched the video and the transcript, I was really moved by what I saw and kept thinking about what I would be feeling in his shoes and what he was experiencing in the moment. And the thing that kept coming back to me was imagining hearing my own heartbeat. And in hearing his voice and the things he was saying, was thinking about the cascading emotions that would be coming out of you in that moment. And so that's what I tried to create in the piece. And I thought about how to kind of simulate that heartbeat sound. First, I was actually thinking of maybe even just using a fist on the side of the piano or some kind of percussive instrument, and finally decided on just using a muted note. So what you'll hear in the beginning of the piece is a low note that is muted, the string is muted, and that is meant to represent the heartbeat. And then it goes from that to sort of a bell tone, which is the realization of what's happening, and then these cascading emotions that are kind of overwhelming him in the moment. And it keeps toggling back and forth between those two. And the piece begins with that heartbeat and then ultimately ends with the heartbeat that in the life that is snuffed out.